Okay. Hi, Louis. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I
Oh, it's a
appreciate it.
delight to be here, Douglas.
So, you are a law professor. Are you still currently a law professor?
I am still currently a law professor at American University in Washington, D.C.
Where is that? I've been to DC many times. I don't know where that is.
AU is in the kind of leafy upper northwest of Washington, D.C., close to Maryland. It's a beautiful campus. It's not in the midst of the monuments and museums that most people come to see in Washington.
Okay, there's an area that I've been to. See, my geography of where everything is vague in DC, but do you know where all the American or the foreign consulates and embassies are?
Sure, that's called Embassy Row on Massachusetts Avenue, and AU is actually quite close to
To
that.
that, okay, then I kind of know where. And there's a big bridge there.
Hmm.
Yeah, okay. See that I've been to. You're here to promote your book. Your book is called "Choose Your Medicine: Freedom of Therapeutic Choice in America." Now, define that therapeutic choice because initially, when I hear that term, I think of, well, let's see, I can buy this brand, or I can try holistic medicine or Chinese herbal medicine or something like that. And we do have that choice, but you're not referring to individual choice, right? You're referring to what doctors would prescribe to you right off the bat?
I'm really talking about all of the above, Douglas. You know, a lot of people today, when they think of medical choice, they tend to think of freedom from compulsion because of the prominence of the vaccination debate. But I started from the other side of the issue, which is people's desire to obtain medicine, whether it's a particular medical product or a particular type of doctor that they want, and opposition to government interference in uh, that effort to gain the medicines that people desire. And the book is about movements over the course of American history to obtain both conventional medicines that you would have prescribed by a physician, but also alternative medicines that are either totally non prescription or were traditionally dispensed by alternative practitioners like homeopathic physicians.
If the government has not approved, the FDA has not approved a particular medication, are you suggesting that people should be allowed to take it anyways, based on their own free will?
Well, let me start by saying that in addition to being a law professor, I'm a historian. And this book is a history of the concept of therapeutic choice in America and its impact on American law and policy and regulation. So I am not taking a position, although I do have my views. Rather, I'm describing the long history of American battles over this issue.
Well, as an example, and I also see it on your bio as a talking point, medical marijuana is something that is very useful for some people with particular ailments. I know somebody personally who has been using medical marijuana for years, and he was using it before it was legal.
Hmm.
And it was unfair, I thought, that he had to go through, the drug dealer down the street to get something that was really vital for his well being. And now, of course, it's legal, and it's also legal recreationally here in Nevada. So that's fine. But this was a long time ago. Now,
Yeah.
I would agree on that point that he should have been allowed to get this through legal means other than having
Hmm.
to to do
Yeah.
a drive-by in a not nice neighborhood.
Can I correct you a little bit on something you said?
Yeah.
Interestingly, while medical marijuana is legal in many states now, and recreational marijuana is also legal in some states, that's a matter of state law. Formally, as a matter of federal law, marijuana is still a Schedule I controlled substance that is illegal. That said, the federal government has pretty much stayed its hand in enforcing marijuana laws or drug laws against marijuana users when people are using marijuana in accordance with one of these state legal systems that's been set up.
You're absolutely right. And I think at this point, it's going to promote a Supreme Court fight once we get to the sort of 26 state threshold. It was the same thing with gay marriage. Once gay marriage was legal in 26 states, then the Supreme Court took it up through that one case that somebody filed. I think the same thing is going to happen with marijuana. That's just my opinion, but
yeah, but medical marijuana is, I think, already legal in something like 33 or 34 states, although recreational marijuana is not. So we've already reached that asserted tipping point with respect to medical marijuana. I'm fairly sure of that fact. I mean, it is an amazing thing if you think about it, the sort of the tumbling domino effect. It's not that long ago in history that not only was medical marijuana illegal all over the country, but people who were supporting medical marijuana were viewed as kind of suspicious, druggy types or something like that. The first state to formally legalize medical marijuana, California, did so in 1996. And then, like the domino effect that I was just describing, state after state after state, both liberal and conservative states of all different shapes and sizes have embraced medical marijuana. And it's an example of how, when you're looking at what American views are toward freedom of therapeutic choice, the place to look is usually not the courts. The place to look is everywhere from legislatures to referenda to the streets, where there are many protests over medical marijuana and many of the other issues I discuss in the book.
would you also argue that there is a conspiracy between big pharma and the government with regards to certain drugs?
I would not agree that there's a conspiracy between big pharma and the government. I would argue that there certainly is a bias toward orthodox medicine and orthodox clinical studies in the federal government. But I don't think that there's some kind of unholy conspiratorial alliance. I've never bought that.
Well, some people have contended that it's the lobbyists, big money, big pharmaceuticals, that they are going to push for legalization of their particular drug and ignore any other alternative medications for particular diseases or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to foolishly claim that the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have a very, very powerful influence in America, and in the federal government. I mean, just look at this week where the right to for the Medicare program to negotiate drug prices was just dropped out of Biden's mega plan. So you'd have to be blind to think that the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have an immense amount of influence. But that said, what I show in the book is that these forces in America demanding access to other drugs are very powerful forces that actually have kept the market for alternative medicine relatively robust, despite the FDA standards and the influence of the pharmaceutical industry you describe. It's one of the puzzles I examine in my book. How can it be that we have a drug regulatory system that demands that every drug be demonstrated to be safe and effective by clinical trials, and then we have this really, really big alternative medicine market where the products have not gone through that system? This is another point I make, is that when you're looking at medical freedom in America, it's not enough to look at the law in the books. You have to look at the law in action. and where the government actually asserts its power and enforces the law. And as we've seen, both with respect to the federal government and medical marijuana, and I would argue with the federal government with respect to alternative medicine generally, as well as state governments with respect to practice of medicine laws and so forth, it remains the case that that whatever the law in the book says, that it is surprising how legal alternative medicine is in this country.
Can you give me an example of an alternative medicine for any particular common ailment that might fall into this category?
So by this category, you mean something that is formally illegal, but is nonetheless easily accessible?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So homeopathic medicines are readily available in America, even though they've never been demonstrated to be safe and effective according to traditional or orthodox clinical trial methodologies. There's all kind of energy medicine, all kinds of devices that you can go onto Amazon and buy that are making all kinds of claims regarding their curative value that are, as a formal matter, just completely illegal, but nonetheless they're easily obtainable by Americans. And I could go on and on.
What about things like particular treatments, not necessarily drugs, but like acupressure, acupuncture? Has any of that been approved government-wise?
One important thing to understand is that the FDA regulates medical products, not medical practice. Whenever you're getting into the world of the regulation of medical practice, for the most part, the place to look is the states. And I examine in the book how, despite a long history of orthodox doctors, those represented by the AMA, implementing and enforcing a very strong medical licensing regime that was used to try to suppress alternative practice. In recent decades, we've seen a very strong counter movement where states are revising their laws in various ways to allow both orthodox doctors to use alternative modalities, but also to allow alternative practitioners to legally practice. Sometimes they have their own licensing regimes. So, for example, many states now have naturopathic licensing regimes. And in other states, there's just basically exceptions to the medical licensing laws that allow alternative practitioners to wield their craft so long as they don't do things like prescribe drugs or perform surgery.
The last thing I wanted to touch on that's also one of your talking points, then we got to wrap it up, is physician-assisted suicide. It seems to me that that's legal in a couple of states, right? Oregon, I know, is one. I don't know the other ones. That's the only one I know for sure.
Yeah, and I should know this, but sometimes I feel like I'm reading a book written by somebody else and I forget the details in it. But I mean, I think it's something like 8 or 9 now or something like that.
That's another practice versus medication. That does not fall under the FDA, right?
That does fall under federal power because one of the most common methods for physician-assisted suicide is using controlled substances.
Oh, okay.
And so the federal government can get pulled into this issue through the substances that are actually being used. But you're right, it's being treated for the most part as a matter of state law. But what I talk about in the book, which is interesting, is the physician-assisted suicide movement started at about the same time as the medical marijuana movement in the mid-1990s, with states, especially on the Pacific Coast, passing initiatives to legalize these two things. And their paths have been very, very different. So while medical marijuana has swept the country, there's a great deal more ambivalence about physician-assisted suicide. And so the difference, again, is like maybe 35 states or something now have legal medical marijuana, but far fewer have physician-assisted suicide. I start that chapter actually by examining a day when the famously liberal state of Massachusetts, on the very same day, enacted medical marijuana legalization, but rejected physician-assisted suicide.
Do you think the physician-assisted suicide is too entwined in religious beliefs?
So I think that there's a couple of characteristics that make it different from the other movements that I examine in the book. One of them is very much religious beliefs. And of course, Massachusetts is a heavily Catholic state. And so the Catholic population of Massachusetts leaned against physician-assisted suicide. But there's another fascinating phenomenon, which is I talk about all kinds of strange bedfellows with respect to support of medical freedom movements. Here, there are strange bedfellows with respect to opposition to physician-assisted suicide, although maybe not so strange if you think deeply about it. You have an alliance of religious conservatives on the one hand and disability rights activists on the other hand, as well as many people from the African-American community and other minority communities. And from the other side, the concern is that physician-assisted suicide, it's almost sometimes even a conspiratorial concern that physician-assisted suicide will be used to, at its worst, cull the population of undesirables. But in its softer version, the fear is that rather than giving, for example, disabled people the healthcare and accommodations they need, that society will take the easy way out if they embrace physician-assisted suicide. And sometimes people even fear that there will be a slippery slope to euthanasia of undesirable populations. And so the very same sort of conspiracy theories that lead to support of free access to other types of medications actually to some extent work against support of access to physician-assisted suicide.
Well, that's very interesting. And on that note, we do have to wrap this up. We are out of time. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
So people can find me on the American University Washington College of Law website. And you can find all kinds of information about the book itself, Choose Your Medicine, Freedom of Therapeutic Choice in America, on the Oxford University Press website or at your favorite bookseller.
Okay, great. Well, Louis, thanks so much for coming on this show. And best of luck.
Thank you for having me.